Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today we're going to do a deep dive into Paul Johnson's A History of the Jews. It's a really incredible book. It's a sweeping narrative that explores the very unique journey of the Jewish people. And this deep dive, we're going to unpack some historical parallels, we're going to debunk a few myths along the way, and offer a glimpse into the cultural, the religious, the intellectual contributions of the Jews throughout history.
Well, one of the things that Johnson does so well is he really manages to connect those grand historical narratives with what we find from archaeology, from literature, from religious texts.
Yeah, okay. So let's start at the very beginning with the ancient origins. One of the first things that really jumped out at me is how Johnson frames Abraham's journey from Ur to Canaan. It wasn't just about, seeking greener pastures. It was a conscious rejection of Mesopotamian paganism.
Right. And the archaeological discoveries at sites like Mari and Nutsi, they give us this crucial context here. They're like these little windows into these ancient societal norms. And it helps us to understand why some of the biblical customs that might seem a little bit strange to us today actually make perfect sense back then.
The sale of a birthright, for instance. That sounds very strange today. But the Nutsi tablets actually reveal it was a very recognized practice, even documented legally back then.
Precisely. And then, of course, you have the Exodus, a pivotal moment that Johnson argues was about so much more than just, escaping hardship. It was about a complete rejection of Egyptian culture and the birth of a distinct Israelite identity forged through that escape.
So it wasn't just physical freedom. It was this break from an entire worldview they were leaving behind. The gods, the customs, the societal structure of Egypt to embrace their own unique covenant with Yahweh.
And this is where the power of the Torah comes in. Johnson argues that Moses, he didn't passively receive the law, he actively challenged the norms of the ancient Near East.
Which were pretty relaxed compared to what the Israelites adopted. The prevalent legal codes at the time allowed for a lot of practices that were strictly forbidden. In the new Israelite moral code,
things like fornication, adultery, even incest, the Israelites under Moses, they drew a very hard line. Their moral code was much stricter, and their laws regarding, marriage and sexual conduct, much more stringent.
And it's fascinating to see how the Torah evolved from oral tradition to a written text. And then its interpretation through the Mishnah, it highlights this adaptability of Jewish law, how it had to remain rooted in its core values while navigating these constantly changing circumstances.
And of course, after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Torah remained that central pillar, that unifying force for people that were dispersed all across the globe.
Let's talk about that diaspora for a second. Johnson challenges this assumption that it was solely a result of exile. He suggests it was also driven by a desire to spread this concept of universal monotheism.
Yeah, it wasn't just a scattering, it was a carrying of a very powerful idea. And it led to these incredibly interesting cultural exchanges. Think about their encounter with the Greeks. Jewish intellectuals really grappling with the allure of Hellenistic culture, while still remaining committed to their faith.
A delicate balancing act, navigating these philosophical and intellectual currents of the time while preserving their very unique religious identity.
Yeah, and institutions like the synagogue and that focus on education, they played such a huge role in ensuring that continuity.
Yeah, it really speaks volumes about their resilience, their ability to adapt and thrive amidst these enormous challenges.
And speaking of challenges, we can't ignore the long and often brutal history of antisemitism that Johnson meticulously chronicles in this book.
He traces it all the way back to ancient Egypt, with these accusations of the Egyptian priest Manetho, who painted the Jews as these diseased outcasts that were expelled from Egypt.
And sadly, as Johnson illustrates, these accusations became a recurring theme. And the rise of Christianity just added another layer of complexity to this, leading to discriminatory laws and practices that targeted Jewish communities.
It's a sobering reminder of how religious differences can be twisted into justifications for prejudice and persecution. But despite facing centuries of this hatred, from blood libels to expulsions, Johnson highlights this remarkable resilience of the Jewish people.
They adapted, they persevered, and they found ways to maintain their cultural and religious identity, even when confronted with this unimaginable hostility.
Which brings us to a critical juncture. The rise of modern anti-Semitism is almost paradoxical. The Enlightenment, a period that we associate with reason and progress, also gave rise to this new and much more insidious form of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, you see this shift. Instead of outright religious persecution, Judaism starts to be viewed as this negative social force. Figures like Karl Marx. He really saw Judaism through this economic lens, blaming Jews for societal ills, economic woes.
So the accusation shifts from deicide, to controlling the world's finances.
Precisely. And this wasn't limited to fringe thinkers either. The Dreyfus Affair in France, a nation that prided itself on its Enlightenment ideals, exposed this deep-seated anti-Semitism that still was very much present in European society.
The case where a Jewish army officer was falsely accused of treason really highlighted this fragility of Jewish emancipation. Even in societies that had supposedly embraced tolerance and equality, prejudice against Jews could still surface, especially during times of political turmoil.
It was a betrayal of the promise of progress and enlightenment, and this leads us to another pivotal moment, the rise of Zionism in the late 19th century, spearheaded by Theodor Herzl.
And this is where the idea of a Jewish state, a return to their ancestral homeland, starts to gain some real traction.
Yeah, Herzl's vision, it was a radical departure from the assimilationist approach that had really dominated Jewish thought for centuries. It was this recognition that despite these attempts to fit in and to be accepted as equals, anti-Semitism persisted. And so the need for a safe and a self-governed homeland became increasingly clear.
And Johnson doesn't shy away from the challenges involved in establishing the State of Israel, from negotiating with the British to navigating that very fraught relationship with the Arab world. It was a complex process and often a very turbulent process.
Yeah, looming over it all, of course, is the horrific shadow of the Holocaust. It's hard to overstate the impact that this event had on Jewish identity and the push for a Jewish state.
It becomes both a testament to the resilience of the Jewish people and a driving force behind that Zionist movement.
It's a complex legacy, one that continues to shape the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, even today. So having explored centuries of Jewish history, from those ancient origins to modern-day challenges, what are some of the key takeaways from Johnson's work?
Well, one thing that really stands out for me is this incredible thread of resilience that runs through this entire narrative. The Jewish people have faced persecution, exile, even genocide, yet they've managed to not only survive, but to thrive and to make these significant contributions to human civilization.
It's this remarkable paradox of people marked by suffering, yet also marked by these extraordinary intellectual, cultural, spiritual achievements, and that tension between enduring hardship and producing these remarkable works of art, literature, philosophy, science. I think that's really at the heart of the Jewish story.
There's this constant push and pull between being part of the world and being apart from it, between striving for acceptance and maintaining their very distinct identity.
And Johnson makes it clear that the Jewish experience is far from monolithic. There are these internal divisions, these different approaches to faith and tradition, a spectrum of political and social viewpoints, even within the Jewish community itself.
Yeah, it's not just a story of one people, but a story of many voices, many perspectives, many interpretations of what it means to be Jewish.
And that diversity, that internal dialogue, is part of what makes this history so rich and so complex.
But why should our listeners care about this history? What makes it relevant to their lives today?
Well, understanding Jewish history, I think, is crucial for understanding the world we live in, from religious texts that have shaped Western civilization to these intellectual movements that have transformed our understanding of the human mind. The Jewish contribution to history is profound, and it's far-reaching.
It's not just about learning about the past. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our present.
Secondly, studying Jewish history offers these valuable lessons about resilience, about the ability to adapt and persevere in the face of adversity.
It can inspire us to face our own challenges, to find strength in our own traditions and communities, to hold on to hope, even when things seem bleak.
And finally, understanding Jewish history is essential for combating prejudice and discrimination in all its forms. By learning about the roots of anti-Semitism, we can better recognize its manifestations in our own time and work towards creating a more just and inclusive society.
It becomes this cautionary tale, reminding us of the dangers of intolerance and the importance of fighting for the rights of all people, regardless of their faith or ethnicity. It's a reminder to be vigilant against all forms of prejudice and discrimination, even those disguised as progress or enlightenment.
Exactly. And that brings us to something that Johnson, I think, really subtly emphasizes throughout the book, the power of ideas. You can't separate the history of the Jews from the development of their religious
and philosophical thought.
Yeah.
And how that, in turn, impacted the world.
Right. We talked about how the Torah became that central pillar of Jewish life, but it wasn't static. It was constantly being interpreted, debated, reinterpreted. Absolutely. The development of the Mishnah, the Talmud, these different schools of thought popping up within Judaism, it all points to this dynamic process of grappling with these ancient texts and applying them to new contexts.
And that process wasn't always peaceful, was it?
Yeah.
I think about the historical clashes between the Pharisees and the Sadducees,
Hmm?
or later, the debates between Maimonides and his critics. What does that tell us?
Well, it tells us that even within Judaism, there were these tensions, these intellectual disagreements, a real ferment of ideas.
Yeah, this constant questioning, this wrestling with ideas, that's really kept Judaism intellectually alive and vibrant for centuries. It's not about blind faith. It's about engaging with your beliefs, challenging them.
And it wasn't just this internal dialogue either. Jewish thinkers, they engaged with the broader intellectual currents of their time. They influenced and were influenced by philosophers, scientists, artists from other cultures.
Spinoza comes to mind here. He really pushed the boundaries of rationalism. And then there's Freud, of course, whose theories about the human psyche, we're still debating and reinterpreting to this very day.
Exactly. These figures demonstrate the profound and lasting impact that Jewish thought has had on Western intellectual history. And it goes beyond just philosophy or psychology as well.
Johnson highlights Jewish contributions to science, mathematics, literature, the arts. The list goes on and on. Their impact on human civilization is undeniable. And that's something I think we often overlook or take for granted.
It's a reminder that these contributions can come from unexpected places, from communities who have faced incredible hardship. It challenges us to broaden our understanding of, where innovation and intellectual breakthroughs can arise.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from ancient patriarchs to modern-day thinkers. As we wrap up this deep dive into Paul Johnson's A History of the Jews, what's the one thing you hope sticks with our listeners?
For me, it's this. Jewish history isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of intellectual and cultural dynamism. It's a story of a people who have faced unimaginable challenges, but have consistently found ways to contribute to the richness and the complexity of human civilization.
It's a powerful reminder that studying history isn't just about dates and facts. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped the world we live in, appreciating the contributions of diverse cultures, and learning from the resilience of those who came before us.
It challenges us to look beyond those simplistic narratives, to recognize the nuances and the complexities of human experience, and to appreciate the enduring power of ideas to shape our world.
If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to explore A History of the Jews by Paul Johnson for yourself. You can find a link to purchase the book in the episode description. And if you enjoyed this insightful exploration of history, don't forget to subscribe to Mindful Moments for more thought-provoking deep dives into captivating books. We'll continue to nourish your mind on the go.